Taxation without representation. What is Washington, D.C.? Why is it in the news right now? What's the chain of command to the police chief? And basically, what's going on with Donald Trump, and is he going to take it over? Can he? But the deep dive tells us, yeah. So Washington, D.C. has been in the news lately, basically because crime is somewhat out of control, according to President Donald Trump. And we're kind of looking at it like, all right, it's been talked about being a state for pretty much a couple of years now. They want the representatives going forward. And I realize how it's actually structured. And it is pretty detailed as far as where it is now, why it can't be a state. So we're going to get into that. Senator Mike Lee actually has a plan right now. And I think it's a pretty darn decent one as well. So understand that when DC was created, it was going to be a neutral facility site for the government of the United States, the newly established United States. Originally, it was 100 square miles. That was the idea along the Potomac River. Of course, we were a much smaller country at that point, pretty much only on the eastern seaboard. So when they did 100 square miles, what happened was the state of Virginia and the state of Maryland gave up land in order to create this Washington, D.C., this District of Columbia. And after a couple of years, James K. Polk, when he came in to be a president, he actually lowered that from 100 square miles down to 68 because a lot of people in Virginia were complaining that, hey, we want our land back. We want to basically be able to vote. So here's the details. There is a constitutional provision right now that the capital city will never be a state. It's written in the Constitution. But here's the other details. It's like it really can't be a state because it doesn't qualify. Now, the Constitution doesn't say how big or how small, what's the smallest limit a state can be as far as land mass and wide and everything else. But really, if you think about it, it has none of the qualifications of being a state. It has no agriculture at all, okay, to speak of anyway, no industry to speak of, and basically doesn't have any resources, doesn't have any coal or water or other natural gas or oil. I mean, just doesn't have anything in there that can really establish itself other than basically the U.S. government coming in there, all the people that work there. So for that aspect of it, you just can't qualify to be a state for all those things. So Mike Lee's plan is to say, all right, we will basically give back the land to Virginia and Maryland, and the federal government will only keep the strip of land, also known as maybe the mall, but the Supreme Court building, the Capitol building, the White House, of course, but all the details, all the structures that are built by the federal government, they'll stay part of the District of Columbia, but every house, every tax-paying citizen will go into their respective state of where they're at. Because understand, the people that live there, they have no real representation right now. Okay, they have one person in the House of Representatives that acts as a shadow. They do not have a voting right. They don't vote at all. They do participate in some committees and other details that they do within the government. They can talk and actually debate things as well, but they don't have a vote. And in the U.S. Senate, Washington, D.C. has zero. So all the people living in Washington, D.C. don't have an actual vote in the Congress at all. How it works is Washington, D.C. has a mayor-council government right now, operating under Article 1 of the United States Constitution and the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. What it's saying is the powers of the United States Congress apply to the local government. The local government, though, is a mayor and a 13-member council. So Congress retains the right to review and overturn the laws, but the laws still are created by the mayor and its 13-member council. And the District of Columbia also has an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch, just like the United States government. So obviously the executive is the mayor, okay? Then this person runs an annual budget of $8.8 billion. It's like, all right, that's a lot of money going forward to govern this little 68 square mile facility. And what does that pay for, of course? All right. So the mayor then appoints 5 deputy mayors going forward. And the deputy mayors all do it. So this is what their list is. The Education Department of Mayor of Health and Human Services, the deputy mayor for Planning and Economic Development, the deputy mayor for Public Safety and Justice, and the deputy mayor for Operations and Infrastructure. Okay, so they all have their own oversight of what certain relevant government agencies that they're in charge of. But if you think about that, they're in charge of this little 68 square mile place. What if that was absorbed into Maryland or Virginia or those states? wouldn't that kind of eliminate those jobs, saving all those taxpayer money, all those dollars, and the budget would actually shrink at that point? Talking about the legislative branch, there is actually 8 wards divided. This 68 square miles divided into 8 wards. Okay, now in those wards, they actually have basically a representative coming forward, and then they have 4 at-large people that oversee the entire area. Okay, so 13 people vote on the legislative branch for their Congress. Now, the last branch is obviously the court system, okay? Superior Court of the District of Columbia is the local trial court. Now, that trial court basically handles everything criminal and civil law. You're talking about family court, landlord and tenant, probate, tax, and traffic offenses. So they do everything at that level. Now, if it gets appealed, though, it does go to the District of Columbia Court of Appeals, and that's the highest court that happens in Washington, D.C. So you see this executive, the legislative, and the judiciary branches of the government within Washington, D.C. Those could technically, again, be absorbed into the different states, saving taxpayer money. Another thing it has its own attorney general, talking about the judges. Okay, so it has its own judiciary committee and attorney general. There's also a bunch of independent agencies as well that operate within the Washington, D.C. area, including the District of Columbia Public School System, also the District of Columbia Public Charter School Board as well. So they got all these different things for schools. Also the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Administration too. So you see all these different organizations acting independently into this Washington, D.C. area, again, costing more taxpayer money. And on top of all of that, there's an advisory neighborhood commission. Now, this is 37 different commissions to basically take care of the neighborhoods. Now, they're an advisory committee, okay, so they don't actually do anything other than advise the 13-member council going forward. But it's like, all right, still, again, where do they meet? Where do they do? I'm sure they don't meet in somebody's home. This has got to be an actually established thing, costing more taxpayer money. Now, it all comes back to the voting rights debate, the taxation without representation. Talked about this in the beginning, but the District of Columbia is not a U.S. state and therefore is no voting representation in Congress. The non-voting delegates in the House of Representatives, they can only do so much. So again, all the people that actually physically live within the city limits of Washington, D.C., and it is a city, it's basically a city, and within the limits of that have no representation in Congress. So very interesting. So there's where the argument comes. Shouldn't you have that because you are being taxed? They pay all, U.S. federal taxes. Wouldn't they want to have a voice? So Senator Mike Lee's plan to absorb them back into Virginia and Maryland sounds like a pretty decent idea as far as if you want to actually have these people have a vote in the government. And I think it would just save a lot of taxpayer money overall because, again, you wouldn't have all these secondary, third, tertiary things going for as far as advisory. What do you think? Let me know. Do you live in Washington, D.C.? If you're watching this and you live in Washington, D.C., are you happy with your representatives right now? Not individually the representative, the way you are represented in the United States government. I don't want to hear about, I hate this Bowser and all that stuff. Who are you thinking about? But the actual thing, bring it in. I want to be able to hear what's going on. Let's have a conversation. Is Washington, D.C. viable to have them absorbed and it only be federal buildings at that point with no actual people live in the residences around Washington, D.C.? It's an interesting debate, but if that's what people want to talk about, that's what we're doing. And that actually, if you look at the crime rates and everything else happening that President Trump is trying to crack down on, this could be a good way to get more resources to the people that live around Washington, D.C. per se. So anyway, put in the comments. Let me know what you think. It's an interesting subject. I think as anything else, you do the deep dive, you start learning about stuff. All the alternatives start popping out. Anyway, hey, we're going to keep reading this, going through it, finding the truth between lines. Between